as always, I think the SEC is the cream of the crop this year. We'll get into that here in just a second, but the Big 12 has a lot of fun, intriguing quarterbacks as well. I can't wait to break that down with you on this episode. But we'll start in the SEC. We'll start down south where it just means more, and we're going to start with the number one quarterback in the SEC this year, and that is, of course, Diego Pavia at Vanderbilt. Totally kidding. If you haven't creamed off the road, I love my
Lock
boy.
your facilities, Tennessee. Diego Pavia is going to do bad things there.
The homeless man's Johnny Football is going to wreak havoc on the SEC this year, but he is not in our top 5. Spoiler alert: he did not make it.
Just missed it. He was in consideration.
In consideration, absolutely. In the 16-team SEC, our number one quarterback is Carson Beck at Georgia, a guy that in his first year as a starter had them right on the cusp of a college football playoff berth, undefeated all through the regular season. They come up just short against a highly motivated Nick Saban Alabama team in Nick Saban's what would ultimately be Nick Saban's last SEC game as a head coach. So Carson Beck, I think, did everything right last year, Garrett. Like, he had stretches without his number one receiver. He lost Brock Bowers. He leaned on Ladd McConkey a lot in those stretches, but there were times he didn't have Ladd McConkey either. And he did well to drive that bus. He has the most talent around him of any quarterback in the entire country, but it's not even that. That's not what makes him good. He's a good quarterback in his own right and would be pushing for this number one spot even if he didn't have all the talent around him. So much like Ohio State, though, the standard has been set very, very high at Georgia, and it's championship or bust. That is the standard that Kirby Smart has set out. So in order to live up to this number one ranking, he has to not only win the SEC, he has to probably go undefeated, and he probably has to at least make the championship game and see the chips may fall where they may in that one, but any given Saturday. But he has to at least make the championship game. So my question to you, he kind of got, a grace year last year, his first year as a starter, but much celebrated quarterback, highly recruited. Can he live up to that hype this year?
Absolutely. There's almost no chance that he doesn't, in my opinion. I think he's Heisman frontrunner. I think he's the guy who will probably end up winning it by the end of the season. I don't really understand the Carson Beck hate I've seen a lot around, right? There's a lot of people who are saying, oh, he didn't put up the flashy numbers. And I think a lot of those people probably only watched the SEC championship game and just didn't really watch Georgia play football last year. And I can't really blame you. Georgia dominated most teams they played last year. So if you weren't watching Georgia football, it's probably because you wanted to watch a competitive game. So I understand that. But look, Carson Beck is a very good quarterback, and he threw for almost 4,000 yards last season, completed 72% of his passes. If you had that number pretty much anywhere, we'd be talking about, oh, he's definitely the Heisman frontrunner. Oh, obviously he's going to be the best quarterback this year. And for some reason, people are just kind of sleeping on him because he's kind of just, I guess, boring and bland and throws to the big tight end and just kind of gets the job done. But, I mean, isn't that what most teams end up wanting out of their quarterback, is a guy who just gets the job done, puts the ball where it needs to be, wins games, doesn't really do anything wrong? Like, he threw 6 interceptions last year. Not awesome for your first season, but he's playing some good teams. And, you're going to be, prone to make a couple mistakes, but 6 picks is still not that bad. 24 touchdowns, good number, right? He'll probably improve on that. I don't think there's a way that he stays under 4,000 yards or under 30 touchdowns this year, because he's going to have to kind of shoulder a little bit more of that burden. They're a run-heavy team at Georgia, right? They're going to run the football a lot. It's a very balanced offense. And so he's not going to put up some of those massive numbers you see out of these, very pass-happy offenses. But at the same time, he's doing everything you ask him to do and more. He's a leader. He's talented. He's got plenty of experience. The sky's the limit for Carson Beck and what the Georgia Bulldogs can achieve this year. There's a reason he's number one on our list.
And he's also the odds-on favorite to win the Heisman right now as we stand in June. It's a wide-open Heisman race, I'll give you that, but he is the betting favorite at plus 750, edging out Quinn Ewers and Dylan Gabriel for that honor. And, yeah, I think you're right. I think in a vacuum, those numbers are fantastic, right? Almost 4,000 yards passing, 24 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 167.9 quarterback rating over his 14 games, last year. You're just asking too much if you're asking for more than that. Of course, he could score a few more touchdowns, but when you have running backs that can bust off a 50-yard run, you're going to limit your opportunities to score touchdowns, right? So he's probably not going to lead the NCAA in passing touchdowns this year, but if it's a year that it's the best player or the quarterback on the best team, he has a really good chance to be the last guy standing in New York with the Heisman Trophy.
And one thing I want to point out real quick, he only failed to reach 200 yards passing one time this last season. He went over 300 5 times. That's pretty good production, especially against an SEC schedule. His one time, funny enough, not reaching 200 yards. He had 175 against Georgia Tech at the end of the season. But as you look into those numbers a little bit more, I had to go back and remember this, but they ran the ball 39 times for 262 yards in that game, only threw 20 passes. So it's not like he had a bad game. There were some turnovers in that game, and, one of those credited to him. So you can't, completely take him off the hook. But yeah, it was an overall bad game for Georgia leading into the SEC championship game. But they were mostly running the football in that game anyway. So it's you can't put that on Carson Beck. He's a very good quarterback. If he was most other teams' quarterbacks, you would think a lot more highly of him because he was playing for a team not called the Georgia Bulldogs.
Yeah, he's playing for a team that's not asking him to play hero ball. And right. So you're going to think that he's playing boring, and that's just simply not true. He's asking.
Well, also you just look at Georgia and you expect a good team, right? So you're like, oh, he's a good quarterback. Okay. Like, well, not okay. That's hard to do in college football. I don't care if your name is Georgia. It's hard to go out there and be a consistently very good to sometimes great quarterback. That's hard to do. I don't care where you're playing. Alabama, they've had some quarterback issues. You see the team start to fall apart. So, like, the fact that Georgia's good is in no small part due to Carson Beck being a very good quarterback.
Yeah, and I'm pulling up the odds to be the first number 1 overall pick right now. He's also the favorite for that in that regard as we sit here in June. Obviously a long way to go for the 2025 NFL draft, but Carson Beck on a lot of teams' radars for the next level already as well. Garrett, let's go to another contender in the SEC for our number 2 quarterback. And it pains me to say this because I like to just joke that people forget about him, and I like to make him the butt of jokes, but he is a very, very good quarterback. Jackson Dart at Ole Miss. All he's done is win as the starter here. I know he struggled to separate himself in his first year down in Oxford after he transferred in from USC. We kind of had some questions on whether or not he was actually good or if he was just a product of the offense. Here I am. I'm ready to swallow my pride, Garrett, and say that Jackson Dart is actually a good quarterback. I know I'm late. I know that I'm probably a year behind in this, but if you know anything about this podcast, you know that this is a big moment for me. I'm swallowing my pride, and I'm telling you right here in June 2024 that Jackson Dart is the second best quarterback in the SEC heading into this season.
That's very big of you, Trey, and I want to commend you for that. This is a big moment. Somebody tag Lane Kiffin because he responds to just about anything on Twitter.
I don't want to talk.
He doesn't want to talk about it, but no, I mean, you're right. There's a reason Jackson Dart is their starter, and it's not because of, default, right? That might have been the reason a couple years ago, but you bring in Spencer Sanders and Walker Howard last season, he still ends up being the starter. When you take 2 quarterback transfers, you're thinking the guy that was there last year probably ain't the guy this year. But it turns out that Jackson Dart really, really elevated his game. He threw for over 3,000 yards, 3,364, 23 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, averaged over 10 air yards per attempt. He was throwing the football. He was doing a really good job getting the ball out of his hand and really running that offense. And this was also production that was done in an offense where 271 carries went to Quinshawn Judkins and 95 went to Ulysses Bennett the fourth, or Bentley the fourth. And they ran for, I'm trying to do a little quick math in my head, but over 1,600 yards together, or maybe just at 1,600 yards together. They ran the ball a bunch, and they still ended up with over.
He ran the ball 119 times as well.
He
So
did.
that,
He took off,
yeah.
and not necessarily for massive, massive yardage. I know there's probably sack yardage incorporated and all that, but he had 8 touchdowns on the ground as well. So, put up 30 touchdowns as a quarterback, you're probably scoring the ball just fine. And he led Ole Miss to a very good record and the 16th overall scoring offense. So, look, you can, hate if you want to. And I know there's a lot of people that are going to sit here and tell us that Quinn Ewers should be number 2. We have our reasons. But Jackson Dart doing a whole lot for his team and really showing his ability to be a factor in a couple different facets of the game, being able to push the ball downfield a little bit and really run what has become one of the better offenses in college football, kind of quietly. I feel like a lot of people don't talk about Ole Miss and how incredible they are on the offense side of the football, but they've been a consistently really, really good offense, even going up against teams like Bama and Georgia and having to go up and compete against some of these top teams. So I'm excited to see what he can do this year. I think he's going to have a really, really good season. And we'll see kind of where the chips fall by the end of the year, but he's a very talented quarterback, and they're not going to lose too many games because of him.
The most impressive thing to me about him in 2023 and why he became a better quarterback in my mind, you hinted at it, Garrett. His air yards per attempt are now over 10 in 2023. And that means he's pushing the ball down the field. In 2022, he was fine, but it was very obvious that Lane Kiffin saw him as a one-read quarterback. Hey, I'm going to telegraph this play for you. I'm going to draw it up, and this is your read. You hit that read. And it's going to go for a lot of yards because I'm Lane Kiffin and I can design good plays and exploit a defense's weaknesses. But Jackson Dart played quarterback last year. He pushed the ball downfield. It opened up the offense more. If he can make a similar jump this year, Ole Miss is certainly pushing for a spot in Atlanta and maybe even more.
Well, and the thing that's kind of understated here is when you look at what he did last year, he increased his yardage by 400 from the previous year, but threw 4 fewer passes.
Yeah,
he wasn't as necessary for their offense. He still attempted 358 passes. It's still modern football, but they run the ball so much at Ole Miss. A lot of people think of Lane's offense as this big, high-powered, throw it all over the yard type of offense, and they can certainly do that, but there's a lot of run game incorporated in that and a lot of mismatches and using the leverage well. And so, when you look at what they want to do on offense, he's not going to be, again, kind of like what we just said with Carson Beck. He's not always going to be your primary threat, hey, you're going to be 85% of our offense tonight. That's not always going to be what happens. He's going to share the ball with the running backs. He's going to, have to deal with some of that in terms of what the game plan is, but he's still going to put up his numbers. And if he keeps improving, if he can get that completion percentage up a little bit, 65%, certainly nothing bad, but get that up to like a 67, 68%, maybe cut a couple more interceptions out, get up to 30 touchdowns. I mean, this could be a really, really special season for Ole Miss.
Absolutely. And you're right. He was more accurate, pushing the ball further down the field. That's a great sign in the development of a quarterback to see that both of those things being true. So you mentioned his name a second ago, Garrett, but our number 3 quarterback, and it was really close. Before Texas fans call me biased or, call us out for being homers, listen, it was really close between Quinn Ewers and Jackson Dart. I put Quinn at 3. We put Quinn at 3 for this list for a couple of reasons in my mind. He's a great quarterback. He is a really, really good to great quarterback. But a couple of things just make me have cause for pause when I'm comparing him to, the Carson Becks and the Jackson Darts of the world. And first of all, before we get into that, that's not saying he's bad. That's just comparing him against the cream of the crop.
Yeah, we're nitpicking the top quarterbacks of the SEC. You're in that conversation. You're a very good quarterback.
You could easily end up number 1 if you're in this conversation right now by the end of the year. But if we're playing the nitpick game, and I think if you're a longtime listener to this podcast, you know where I'm going with this. Quinn still struggles under pressure at this point in his career. And that's can be said about a lot of quarterbacks. But if you pressure Quinn, if you get in his face, he does struggle to stay upright and he does struggle to make the play that he needs to make. So I want to see, and this was kind of the tiebreaker for me, Garrett. Obviously, Quinn had a great season last year, leading Texas to the college football playoff. Triumphant season. for Quinn Ewers and that Longhorn offense. The tiebreaker to me between him and Jackson Dart is I've seen Jackson Dart do it in the SEC. I've seen Jackson Dart do it week in and week out against the best athletes and the best defenses in college football. And I know we've made much about Texas' schedule this year. I know that they got kind of the easy end of the stick on that mind, and they're not playing the top teams in the conference week in and week out. But the level of athlete, I'm going to keep saying this until I'm blue in the face this preview season. And Texas fans and Oklahoma fans are going to hate me for it, and I don't care. The level of athlete that they are going to face week in and week out in the SEC is going to be a drastic step up from what they face in the Big 12. They're going to face more future NFL draft picks on the defensive side of the ball. They're going to face better athletes. They're going to face guys that can cover more ground than the guys in the Big 12. Big 12 has great players. Big 12 has a ton of guys that go on to make a lot of money in the league. They do not have as many per capita as the SEC. Plain and simple, that's a stated fact. You cannot dispute me on that. And it's going to be eye-opening the first time they don't bring their A game to Starkville or Fayetteville or any of these other lookover games. They're not going to get away with it like they did in the Big 12 year in and year out.
Yeah, and the thing that I want to point out just in terms, again, we're nitpicking here. We're just trying to figure out how do you split the two guys, because I don't think anybody on this podcast is going to say Quinn Ewers is a bad quarterback. He's a very good quarterback. I watched him in high school tear up my high school team. Okay, I am a local guy to, close to South Lake. Our high schools play a bunch, and he tore us up pretty good a couple years ago. And look, it's not fun watching him make every single throw on the field. Quinn, I honestly think Quinn might be the most talented quarterback in college football. He might have the highest ceiling of any quarterback in college football, because when he is on, he doesn't miss, right? You can look at the Oklahoma State game. He completed 76% of his passes for 452 yards. That's disgusting. I'm sorry. That is gross. You're not allowed to do that. That's like, if you did that in, Madden or NCAA here in a couple months, people would say like, okay, bump the difficulty, right? You're clearly playing it on easy mode, right? And you can't get away with that. He did this in the Big 12 championship game against a very good Oklahoma State team. This is a very good team, and I think a lot of us expected them to put up a much bigger fight than they did. Quinn stole the show. He decided, this is my game, this is what I'm doing. And, with that, though, the little bit of inconsistency, did not show up as good against Washington. Washington with a much better defense, obviously, than what Oklahoma State was working with, but completes, 55% of his passes for the 318. Anytime you're throwing the ball more than 40 times and you only complete about half of them, you're leaving opportunity on the table for other players if you're running the football, if you're setting up screens, stuff like that. Additionally, there's a little bit of the injury concern. I know he got hurt last year, kind of a weird thing. A lot of times a quarterback gets injured, we immediately put him on the injury concern list. I don't think it's always fair, but yeah, you got to ask yourself, against better teams, against more physical players and tougher competition, bigger guys, faster guys that hit harder, is he going to be able to make it through the SEC schedule? You certainly hope so. I don't want to wish, any injury on him. That's not me. That's not what I'm going to do. But that's kind of your little concerns that separate him. But I will say this again, when Quinn Ewers is on, nobody in college football can stop him, because when he has decided he wants to play well, when he gets in the rhythm, when he gets in his zone, right? Just look at the Oklahoma game. He came out super flat, and then he turned it on, and they almost won that game. And look, when he decided,
disastrous start. He couldn't
disaster of the start. Yeah, he throws 2 picks, but ends the game with an 83% completions for 346. That's pretty freaking good. That's the great quarterback right there. So when he's on, when he is feeling it, when he's in his rhythm, you can't stop him. I don't think there's anything in college football that can stop him. But when he struggles, when he gets in his head, when he gets his eyes off of the downfield guys, when he starts to kind of, get a little jittery in the pocket, that's where you start to see things mess up for him. He got rid of a lot of that in his year 1 to year 2 jump at Texas. He's going to need to do a better job of that from year 2 to year 3 to win in the SEC.
Absolutely. And I think, again, the whole team is going, and the coaching staff, and Steve Sarkisian knows this because he was a coach in the SEC. So he knows this. and he's preparing the team for this. But
yeah,
it doesn't hit until it hits, right? Like until they get punched in the mouth and they have to make a big comeback to win a game, and a game that they're favored by multiple scores, because it's an SEC team with more talent than
but it happens.
the Iowa States and the BYUs and the Houstons of the world, right? They can get away with playing crappy against Houston last year. And Quinn, I think, got hurt in that game, but they can get away with that. And I think Quinn, it's going to be eye-opening for Quinn. It's going to be eye-opening for that whole program to see that firsthand. Their coaches are going to preach it to him all offseason. I know that they're already doing that because their coaching staff has seen it firsthand.
Yeah.
For 18 and 22-year-old kids, they got to see it for themselves. You know that from experience.
And another thing I think that's going to be curious about Quinn and his development, where I think he's going to do a good job. I think he's going to do well at this, but it's a X factor in terms of what do we know? We can't really prove it yet. Is his ability to lead the new faces in this Texas offense. They're losing a lot of production from last year at the skill positions. Texas is always talented. They always have the players. They did great in the transfer portal. They brought in guys who can do it, but these are all still new faces to the University of Texas, right? These are guys that still have not put on the burnt orange yet. Or if they have put on the burnt orange, they've been in backup roles or maybe they played sparingly. So it's going to be their time to shine, their time to prove what they can do. But Quinn's going to have to lead that, right? As the quarterback of any team, but especially at the University of Texas, it's the U show, right? At the University of Texas, it is the Quinn Ewers show. And there's the second that you start to mess up, they're calling for the backup, right? That's just what happens at these big schools, at these big, brands. Can he lead those young players? I think he can. I think that he can figure that out. But that's another thing to see is what happens when, you sleepwalk into Starkville and you're down 14-0 because you forgot to show up for an 11 a.m. kick in the SEC, right? It happens to everybody. And, the really good teams overcome that and win those games. Can Quinn be the leader that they need him to be? I think the answer is yes, because he's been there. He's done that. It's just something we have to wait and see about the SEC with this group of guys.
Let's tick off another fan base for how lowly they have their quarterback rated that made the playoff last year. Jalen Milroe checks in at number 4. If there was an award for most improved player in the country, not just the SEC, I think you give that to Jalen Milroe last year. If you could just
not just quarterbacks, most improved overall.
Yeah, player. What we saw from him early in the season to what we saw at the end when he's taking down Georgia and going toe-to-toe with J.J. McCarthy in Michigan. Obviously, the game didn't end how they wanted out in Pasadena, but Jalen Milroe is a bona fide top 5 quarterback in the SEC. That's not a strong hot take, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I'm a little concerned about. Here's why he's not number 1 or number 2. I mentioned this a few months back when Kalen DeBoer was hired at Alabama. I'm fascinated to see how Jalen Milroe fits in that Kalen DeBoer offense as a chess piece. That's my only concern with him. He's going to be asked to throw more. He's going to be asked to learn a new offense. And the, staff at Alabama last year really tailored their offense to Jalen Milroe's skill sets. Kalen DeBoer is a fantastic coach. I'm not sitting here saying that he's going to try to make Jalen Milroe do things that he's not good at. He's just naturally going to have to throw the ball more and challenge downfield a little bit more than he did. He's not going to have Jermaine Burton to throw the ball to. That was kind of his big play guy down the field last year. So I'm just interested. I'm not saying that he's going to be bad. I'm not saying that it's going to be a failure when these two styles kind of mesh. I'm just interested. And that's why he's not number 1 or number 2 to me. He's the second most proven quarterback in the SEC behind Carson Beck to me. But lots of unknowns, lots of new things that he's going to have to prove himself in. That's why he's number 4 and not higher.
Well, and they also lost Isaiah Bond to Texas, who's, that's going to be a big piece out of their offense as well. I do think that Milroe's going to have success. I'm going to stand up for this guy because, again, a lot of people haven't necessarily. I'm not saying that you're picking on him, but, I think a lot of people have been really quick to just dismiss him and say, oh, well, Saban's gone. Oh, well, it's going to be fine. Oh, whatever. Guys, Saban, first off, was a defensive first type of guy. So, I'm not saying he didn't know how to help an offense, but he's a defensive first type of guy. I didn't love their offensive coordinator last year. You can ask, questions about him, but I didn't love what they did on the offensive side of the football last year. Their center definitely didn't help them. And, there's a good chance that we're talking about one good snap being the difference between a national championship and sending Saban out on a strong note, or, now where they are, which is not quite finishing it off in the Rose Bowl. So, one good snap, he had a receiver if he wanted to go that direction, or could have followed his lead block through the hole that was there and then disappeared before he had to pick up the football. So, look, it is what it is. No need to go nitpick one play, but Milroe's a really good quarterback. He's developed really well. He's developed his passing ability. He made some really big-time throws down the stretch. You think about the end of the game against Auburn, that's big-time throw. He found a guy at the back of the end zone in a play where you have to hit the end zone. They're playing, tough coverage in the end zone where you're not supposed to be able to find somebody. He put that ball on a dime to beat Auburn in the Iron Bowl and made several very, very competitive throws against a Michigan defense that was supremely talented with an extremely good back-end secondary. So, obviously they didn't have the success they wanted last year. His numbers don't necessarily jump off the page at you, but he did throw the ball down the field. He's got 10.6 air yards per attempt. He had 23 touchdowns, 6 picks. He had a 172 rating. He's a good quarterback. He also adds such another element on the ground as a runner. He had 12 touchdowns on the ground. I think like 500 yards running. Yeah, 500 yards running on the ground, 12 touchdowns. He can do it all. He's a good quarterback who, if they can get it right with DeBoer, if DeBoer can get it right and coach him up and find a way to coach an offense where, he will be able to, coach a running style quarterback, a real dual threat type of quarterback, I think they're going to have a lot of success at Alabama. And again, I think the rumors of Alabama's demise will have been greatly overstated if they can figure that part out.
Yeah, he had 500 yards rushing with about 11 million sacks factored in there. So,
it's just crazy.
Yeah, his offensive line was not good last year, and that's a lot of the reason why Alabama looked like they took a step back on the field. So, yeah, that's the two keys for me. Can he mesh with DeBoer? And can the offensive line, specifically the center position, take a big step forward and just set them up better for success? So that's the top 4.
Mm-hmm.
Carson Beck, Jackson Dart, Quinn Ewers, Jalen Milroe. We got one more spot here in our top 5. I've got 3 guys for you to consider, Garrett. Feel free to throw out anyone else that catches your eye because obviously there's a lot of depth in the SEC. All right, I've been practicing this last name, Nico's last name. I've always chickened out and just said Nico. I'm going for it today, Garrett. Nico Iamaleava.
Iamaleava, I think, maybe.
I will have it
Sounds
right.
about right.
I'll have it right by August. I'm sorry, Tennessee fans. I'm sorry, Nico.
So Nico, yeah.
Nico, Connor Wegman, and Brady Cook are my 3 that I present to you for consideration. Obviously, that leaves off a few guys that are a little less proven. We've got, Jackson Arnold at Oklahoma. Brock Vandegrift at Kentucky, transferring up from Georgia. Garrett Nussmeier at LSU. There's a lot of guys that could be top 5 by the end of the year. Those are the next 3 for me in no particular order. And I know Nico and Connor haven't been as proven because they've been behind proven starters or injured in Connor Wegman's case, but them and Brady Cook are the 3 I'm considering for the number 5 spot. I'll leave it up to you.
Yeah, I think it's tough, but then it's not once you realize what it is. So if you're looking at Nico, you look at Connor, you look at even Garrett Nussmeier at LSU. These are guys that have played a little bit, but you really haven't been able to see a whole bunch of. I know Connor has played a little bit more. I think he's probably the most proven of that group where, he kind of played back, third of the season a couple years ago, ended up beating LSU, finish off the year, which is pretty solid. And that season, that was just a disaster for the Aggies. And then played decently well last year. Didn't have a great game against Miami. Didn't have a lot of time. His offensive line definitely let him down.
Wasn't his fault.
Yeah, no, not his fault. He did attempt to evade pressure about as well as you can when your offensive line it's Swiss cheese, right? It's just you can't stop anything. And so I think Connor's the most proven. I think there's a lot of people that have optimistically put him higher on these types of lists. As an Aggie fan, I don't think you can justify it quite yet. I think he is in that sort of 6 to 8 range in the SEC where he's shown you enough to show that he's plenty talented, can make a bunch of throws, but how does he fit with what Colin Klein wants to do? How does he fit? I don't know. Colin Klein has had some success with some running quarterbacks. Wegman kind of has some wheels, but not necessarily a run first type of quarterback. How can he have success with that, different style of offense? Can he pick it up in time to have some success? So that's a big question for him. I think when you look at Nico and Nussmeier, I think you're just looking and saying these guys have played like a game and looked pretty good, but I guess we'll see what happens, right? Who knows? Bowl season's weird. Anything can happen. I think you have to say Brady Cook is number 5 here. He passed for over 3,000 yards. He 21 touchdowns, 6 picks, and he led his team to one of the best seasons Missouri's had in a long time, and ultimately a Cotton Bowl victory over Ohio State. I don't see how you can put anyone else above him from this list. There's a lot of guys that maybe finish higher than him after the year. Like maybe Brady Cook doesn't, hold his own, but right now, preseason, Brady Cook's the 5th best quarterback in the SEC. He can make a bunch of throws. He's got a great group of receivers to throw to. Luther Burden's an absolute threat, and you can kind of say, screw it, Luther's down there somewhere. There's a real ability to do that. I think Brady Cook is the 5th best quarterback in the SEC, and I think there's kind of a gap right now between him and, if you want to make it Connor, you want to make it Nico, you want to make it, Garrett Nussmeier, like whoever it is, I think there's a pretty good gap between Brady Cook and whoever is next on that list.
I don't know if you're intentionally trolling Oklahoma fans by not mentioning Jackson Arnold, but if you are, props to you for continuing to.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. We're supposed to hate Oklahoma on this podcast or something. I don't know. No, Jackson Arnold, he's very talented as well.
He's in that same group where he hasn't.
Yeah, he's in that group of hadn't really done a whole bunch, hadn't gotten to prove himself yet. Very talented, very, very talented. But again, you're not really sure. And I don't know that this is the year for an Oklahoma quarterback to break out. We talked about that again. Oklahoma fans, don't hate us. You have a tough schedule. Don't hate us. Hate the SEC offices who gave you this schedule. That's not our fault. We didn't make the schedule for your first year and force you to play like 5 or 6 of the top teams from last year. So I don't know that this is the year for an Oklahoma quarterback to break out, but I'd love it if you prove me wrong and Oklahoma turned out to be a force. So I don't think there's anybody who's really proven very much underneath that. I'm kind of scraping the bottom after that and saying, I guess Diego Pavia was pretty okay. Peyton Thorne has better weapons this year, maybe. I guess Taylon Green was okay. He'll be good for Arkansas, maybe.
Taylon Green
he's going to Boise State. And he ain't got nothing at Arkansas to help him, but that's neither here nor there. So I don't know. Yeah. I think right now you have to say Brady Cook's number 5, and then there's a group of very talented unprovens, and then there's everybody else. Thanks for playing SEC football.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if we re-ranked it at the end of the year, because there's several guys that could make a case for number 1 maybe by the end of the year if they take a few extra steps.
Gracious, how about